You're listening to Convenience Matters, brought to you by NACS. Whether it's for food, fuel, drinks, or snacks, about half of the U.S. population shops at a convenience store every day. We'll talk about what we see at stores and what the future may hold for our industry.
When we look at fuel demand, we look at what are the trends related to right now. But we also have to look at where we're going, what's happening with the future of vehicles. What will people be buying? How will they be buying? And what will they be doing with those vehicles? That's what we're going to talk about today. Welcome to Convenience Matters. My name's Jeff Lenard with NACS.
And I am John Eichberger with NACS and the Fuels Institute. And Jeff, I'm excited to have this discussion today. It's going to be a fantastic conversation.
We're going to talk about cars.
What better way to kind of get us going here? We have a great guest today, Steve Smith, who is the Executive Director of Custom Research and Data Strategy with Automotive News. That's a mouthful, but Steve, welcome to Convenience Matters.
John, Jeff, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here and looking forward to today's discussion.
So we're going to dive right into the deep end. The United States recently had an election. And in the aftermath of that election, there have been announcements from California beforehand, from Quebec, from the United Kingdom, all over the place about getting out of internal combustion engines and moving into electric vehicles. And it's all being done in the context. And the Fuels Institute released a report towards the end of 2020 looking at the various environmental initiatives that affect the transportation sector. And one of the common themes of all of these news stories and all of these analyses is the trend to decarbonize the transportation space. And within that context, I'm constantly wondering, what does that really mean for the automotive sector? A lot of the companies have said, we're going all in on electric. They're shifting their resources, their investments. But this is a huge market, absolutely gigantic. I mean, from what you guys are seeing in automotive news and the coverage you guys have been publishing, what's your initial reaction to this kind of tsunami that's coming towards us to get out of carbon?
Well, I think first and foremost, the automakers have done a tremendous job addressing a lot of the consumer fears, consumer concerns, anxiety when it comes to vehicles equipped with electrified powertrains. For the last several years, right, the anxieties that we have heard about frequently, range anxiety, charge time anxiety, even segment anxiety in terms of vehicles large enough to meet the various needs of families. Automakers have really come a long way in addressing those, not only within the battery technology themselves, but also the technologies around making the vehicles lighter and helping them go further, et cetera, et cetera. And so they've really come a long way. And I think that the horizon, the future of electric vehicles is certainly very strong. This past year alone, automakers have announced huge bets, big investments within the electric vehicle space. We are seeing the emergence of new players, folks like Rivian. Tesla has really done some terrific job, certainly not a new player, but they have done a terrific job over the last several years as they've grown their market share as well. So the products themselves are getting better. And the question remains, however, whether consumer adoption is going to be at a scale that allows us to get to the 2035 targets that a lot of these regulations are outlining, and a lot of these regulations are driving towards, pardon the pun, but driving towards. And that is going to be, I think, interesting to watch. Automakers are adding capacity. Ford has just announced a significant investment in their plant in Kansas City to support the E-Transit Connect that will be fully electrified. And so they are installing capacity. They are installing within relative to vehicles. Battery manufacturers are installing capacity, et cetera. And so the volumes are ramping up. The question is going to be, do consumers actually want these things? And to me, I think it's going to be very interesting to watch that when you look at things like residual value, are these vehicles going to maintain their value 5 years from now, 6 years from now, if I buy one and I want to trade it in for something else? Is the battery technology in that vehicle obsolete? Is it old? Is it, I think we run this challenge in the cell phone market as well. In various models that come out, the old ones become obsolete very, very quickly. And so for me, I think it's interesting to watch that says, yes, I applaud all of these regulators and the regulations to get us to a carbon-free, reduced carbon environment. I think the automakers are really doing a good job in addressing consumer needs. I think they're installing capacity to increase volumes and productions. Are consumers feeling better about it? Yes. Are they going to be willing to pull out their pocketbook and buy them at a scale that increases over the next several years? I think that's still to be determined.
And I think that's where I kind of keep scratching my head is, I've been watching this for a long time, and you and I've talked about it several times, that for consumers to abandon what they've been driving for decades, the technology they know about, they're very familiar with, they understand, they know where to get the energy, to transition to something new takes a significant commitment on the part of the consumer. And it's not the same as buying when the smartphone came out, because that wasn't trying to replace an entrenched product. It was something brand new, something that immediately provided benefit to consumers' way of life. We're talking about a substitute for what they've been doing. Now, it is very different. It's very, very technologically advanced. I mean, the new vehicles coming on are fantastic. You mentioned Rivian. They got this pickup truck coming on that looks awesome. It is a serious workhorse. One thing that made me kind of going off on a side or a tangent here, but it says it can ford a 3-foot stream. Okay, that's great. But I'm thinking it's an electric truck going through water. It doesn't seem like it's going to make sense to me. But it's not an issue. The capabilities, the technology is fantastic. But to get consumers to en masse shift, I don't think they're going to do it on their own at the pace they want, which is why I think the leaders, the elected leaders around the world are saying we need to do something to accelerate this. The industry has gotten together. They launched this Zero Emissions Transportation Association in mid-November. And that is an organization that's going to lobby to create federal programs that will result in 100% of all vehicles sold by 2030 being electric, or at least zero emissions. This recognition, I think, that if we're going to sit and wait for consumers to make the choice, we're going to be waiting a very long time.
I would agree. I would agree with that. And let me also add on, right, there is a competing technology. That is to say, internal combustion engines get better every year.
Yep.
Right. Not only in terms of more performance out of smaller engines, but certainly also the environmental impact of those new technologies as internal combustion engines get better and better also reduces, right? So if I'm an automaker, I have a path in front of me that says electrified. Certainly they are convinced, certainly from the model announcements that is evident. And that's not only in the US, right? The complexity then also continues of what are you manufacturing in different parts of the world to meet consumer interests that are different in every market. Electric vehicle technology gets better. Internal combustion engine technology gets better. There are a whole lot of variables out there that I think that make it interesting to see if 2035, 2030 is going to be attainable. All of that being said, you have to applaud the automakers for the innovation. You have to applaud them for listening to consumers and addressing their needs. And so we will get there, whether it is 2030, 2035, 2050, who knows, but it is certainly a step in the right direction.
Well, I haven't read the California and the Quebec bans specifically, but I would imagine the Quebec one, anytime there's something that involves a regulation, it starts with the word sorry. Just because that's Canada, but more broadly, when you think about the adoption of something that is somewhat radical for behavior, and it's such a big purchase, it seems that to push a lot of people towards electric and to think about, oh, well, did I think about this? Did I think about this? Did I think about this? That the communication that your publication and others has with consumers is critical, because the easiest way to get somebody to try something new is to have somebody show you how to do it. And besides having your next door neighbor like literally walk you through the process, the auto publications are the key way to do that for people who are shifting. Although I suppose they're a little bit more in tune with all of these things anyway. So is there a path forward to telling people more about what they need to look at with EVs and what might that involve?
Yeah, I think, yes, there is. So I think from an OEM perspective, right, in marketing, sales, and service, there are key themes that, regardless if you're talking about standard internal combustion engines versus electrified engines, right? There's certain things that draw on consumers' passion with vehicles. It's performance, it's styling, it's comfort, and all of those things can certainly be embedded within an electrified vehicle. And one would argue, I think some could argue that the performance of an electrified vehicle could be a little bit better than vehicles with internal combustion engines. So I think there is a role of consumer-facing automotive magazines out there to tell the story of those things that tug on consumers' heartstrings when it comes to driving, those enthusiasts, etc. And I think that's important. I think marketing, sales, and service within OEMs are already doing so. And test drives, a Tesla versus name another performance brand. Those are out there. I think in pretty regular fashion. I also think the other piece of that is incentives, right? I think incentivizing consumers to invest in these technologies, to invest in these vehicles, is also going to be a big part of that tipping point. Electric vehicles have certainly come down in terms of price comparison to vehicles with internal combustion engines. That's important. I think continued incentives around taxes, continued incentives in terms of rebates, all are going to be very important to telling the story as to why an electric vehicle, when faced with a choice with an EV versus a vehicle with an internal combustion engine.
And I think, when you look at it, it is price parity is going to be upon us pretty soon, even without incentives. I think in the next 5-6 years, you're going to be able to buy a comparably equipped electric vehicle for the same price as an internal combustion engine. So that's happening. I think the capabilities of the vehicles is improving. And you're right. There's electric vehicles out there. They're going to perform better than internal combustion engines. The other big thing is consumers want to buy what they want. And the American consumer in particular likes utility vehicles. They like trucks. I think it's 2/3 or more of the vehicles sold in the United States fit into those categories. I saw a report recently that by 2030, 75% of electric vehicles built in the United States will be trucks and utility vehicles. So not only are they getting lower price, better performing, they're also starting to be built in the vehicle types that customers have been demanding for decades. And that is going to be a significant changer. The other thing that I think is interesting is, I lament the death of the love affair with our cars. I love driving. I think about cars all the time, not just because it's my job, but because I'm a geek for them. I love them. Yet the generations behind us don't show that same propensity. The percentage of 20-somethings have a driver's license continues to go down every single year. And it just blows my mind that that's happening. But they are also very technologically inclined. And as these new vehicles come on the market, and they are such technological marvels, I'm wondering, will the electric vehicle rekindle an affinity for the car itself? Will these younger consumers are going, hey, that's a pretty cool computer on wheels, and start rekindling that affair that we've had for so many decades, which would be I believe, a huge plus in the direction of the transportation sector.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And I think the verdict is out, or we'll have to wait and see if what you're describing there actually happens. But I will say that given the mobility models and given what we've seen, that a lot of these technologies are first scaled in business models where consumers don't actually own the vehicles, right?
Yep.
Be they on the personal mobility side, even on the commercial vehicle side, and last mile delivery using electric vehicles, etc. I think there is a heck of a lot more opportunity for young people to experience what exactly an electric vehicle is without necessarily owning it. If you're sitting at home working in this very remote world and a electric vehicle delivery van pulls up in front of your door, that's an experience, that's an exposure that I think a short time ago probably would have been less frequent. If I'm calling a ride-sharing app and an electric vehicle pulls up, you're getting that exposure without young people actually having to make the investment 5 figures in terms of actually buying the vehicle. And I think those are important experiences, John, to your point, that are going to be influential in the next generation of consumers considering an electric vehicle.
So tying two things you guys said, I remember a couple of years ago seeing a presentation of yours, John, where you talked about like all the songs and things like that, how the car was celebrated. And yes, I'm a little out of touch with the top 40 now, if there is such a thing. I haven't heard a song about cars in decades. So yeah, let's bring that back. And the other thing is thinking about the Tesla. It's almost jumped beyond being an EV. You think of, I want a Tesla, and to a certain extent, some people may have forgotten it's an EV. It's just that the Tesla is the brand, and that's what I have to have because I have to have it. And it struck me that brand has real cachet. Right near us, where we live outside in the DC suburbs, is a town called Vienna. And Wawa opened its first store that is a charging only store. No gas, you can only charge there. And I've been there a couple times, and I've seen they have maybe 15 or so chargers. And my thought before I came there was a bunch of people are going to be parking there, but they're not going to be using them. And you see they're all being used, or 75% of them are. But I think it also goes to something that John had talked about over time, where 10 years ago we were looking at being left on the outside in terms of being thought of as charging places because the time was too long. We want to go to malls and things like that if it's going to be a 4-hour charge. Now we're talking about a 10, 20-minute charge tops, a fill-in. So for convenience retailers, we've talked about it for a while. There's opportunity here, and there may be the opportunity, like looking at like what Wawa's doing, was they're tying into the brand, the coolness, and they found that they're bringing people there, and you see them, they're getting their hoagies, or going in their car, they're hanging out, they're getting that 10-minute charge, and away they go. So it seems like there's a way to do something more from the convenience side, and it may not necessarily be all-out threat.
You make it's a great point, Jeff, because the Electric Vehicle Council of the Fuels Institute and the infrastructure project NACS has to help deploy EV chargers to stores, we're starting to build these use case scenarios and descriptions of certain stores and certain communities need different types of charging capabilities. If you are on the interstate, maybe you need that 350 kilowatt DC fast charger. If you're in a suburban area where people are only driving 20, 30 miles a day, maybe you don't need 350 kilowatts. Maybe you need a 50 kilowatt DC fast. Maybe you need a level 2 charger. We need to better understand, Steve, you and I have talked about this too. We need to better understand how the consumers are going to be using their vehicles and what their recharging behavior is going to be, and then build the infrastructure to support what the consumer wants.
Indeed.
We've been throwing darts at a board for a long enough. And I think in 21, we're going to be coming out with some resources through NACS and the Fuels Institute to really help us get our arms around what does that recharging infrastructure need to look like, and where does it need to be so that we can support these customers as they start transitioning to a new powertrain.
And I think there's a real opportunity there. I mean, the traditional gas station infrastructure is very robust in the United States, and it's very convenient for most consumers. I think there is opportunity to not only match that, but expand that, right? You don't find your gas station at home, a gas pump at home in your garage. You certainly find a charging. You can plug your car in at home. You don't find a gas pump at the grocery store in many cases. Certainly there are these big box stores that have adjacent gas stations, co-branded, etc. You don't find gas stations at the parking garage of the office. The opportunity when it comes to electrification and electric vehicles to create, in many respects, what I think more convenience over time versus what we find today in the gas refueling infrastructure. I think there's a huge opportunity there to address the convenience piece of all of this.
Yeah, and also with that Wawa store, it used to be a Caldwell Banker. And the goal wasn't to let's create the first store without with chargers and not gas. It was a tight space that didn't have enough room for a traditional forecourt. So they just thought differently. And what they said their stated goal was, we want to enter a market fairly quickly. And this is the way to do it without going through all the procedures that you typically need for a traditional petroleum forecourt. They were able to open the store much more quickly, a new format, and try something different. So it's interesting how the EV may be a way that the convenience industry reinvents itself.
One of the things that's important to note is, Steve, you're talking about the diversity of opportunities to recharge an electric vehicle. That's going to be the case. There's going to be more locations and types of locations where consumers can get electrons to power their vehicle. And that could be viewed by a convenience retailer as a major threat. It's like, well, right now they have to come to me. Now they can go anywhere? No, I don't like that. But through the EV Council, we've been talking to a lot of advocates in the electric vehicle space, those who build stations, those who drive vehicles, those who make vehicles. And they all say the same thing. I don't own an internal combustion engine anymore, John. That doesn't mean I don't want my soda, my coffee, or my convenience store product. I still go to my convenience store as much as I used to because they have stuff I want. And I'm not abandoning that because that's part of what I want. Just because I switched my powertrain doesn't mean I'm not going to be frequenting those stores anymore. And it's a mindset the industry needs to understand is we have more to offer than just fuel. It is hugely important. Offering electrons will be very important in the near future, but that in-store offer also can be a destination for your customers, and developing that offer and ensuring that you're providing your customers what they want, how they want it, when they want it, will keep them coming back, even if they buy a different kind of car.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree that this does create a new basis for competition, and I think creates more competition for convenience stores and grocery stores. If you're a retailer with a brick and mortar, a pharmacy, a big box retailer, I think there's opportunity to create revenue, to draw customers against your competition in your segment by having this charging infrastructure relatively available in the parking structure. So there are, I think, going to be some new bases of competition, some new frontiers of competition. But you're absolutely right, John. I don't think very few people, especially Americans, would abandon what they desire, what they get from convenience stores and refueling stations, gas stations, in addition to where they go to refuel their vehicles.
Well, I think we're almost out of time here, Steve. Thank you so much for joining us. I love these conversations. There's so many places for us to take the discussion, so many nuances to explore and evaluate. The market's changing. It is going to start changing at a faster clip, whether it be driven by the consumer mindset or by regulations. The market's going to evolve faster than it has to date. Doesn't mean that it's going to overwhelm society overnight. There's still opportunities for traditional retailers to take advantage of it and prepare for it. But let's keep the dialogue going, because there's a lot of things we need to be figuring out over the next 5 years. And the more we talk about it, the better off we're all going to be.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. This was a terrific conversation.
And thank you for listening to Convenience Matters.
Convenience Matters is brought to you by NACS and produced in partnership with Human Factor. For more information, visit convenience.org.